it's mostly men versus nature. That's the what I see. And then there's obviously this pillar of salt, his wife turning into it, and such a powerful moment in this image. You know, it's what makes this image powerful. It's dark and light. It's so clear. It's so beautifully painted, and this takes me even deeper into the story in thinking, well, what if the city that he's leaving is not really a city, but it's really part of ourselves that has sinned? What if the whole story can be read as a person, as one person, conflicting with himself, and then leaving that? And what does it mean by don't look back? Don't judge yourself back. Don't look back and say, hey, I've done all this thing, and judge that. Maybe how can you take that and be positive for the future? How can you? So that's how I take the story, and this is all from just sitting and looking at this painting. These are the thoughts that come to me, and they're just my interpretations. And anyone else can have a completely different interpretation. But I feel it's because Corot, as a narrative painter, really is painting the feeling of the story. Is really interested in finding an essence of the story. And I think that's what I love actually reading in the Bible. I really enjoy doing that because I can read it in Hebrew. And in Hebrew, it has so much more meaningful interpretations because each word has so many different roots and meanings that the English version is already a translation. So it's one level down. It's already somebody kind of explaining that. But it's really close to how you would actually look at the painting, because that way of interpreting it can happen to anyone in many different ways. So to me, that's the real beauty of narrative painting, of how it can develop as you paint, and the first thing that interests you in the painting then becomes something much deeper as you go and paint and understand and kind of visit that initial feeling that you had about it. I'm putting these two sculptures here. This is the beauty from the cloisters, just to show what can be made of stone, of concrete. How can and related to that big, shape here, this big stone mass, and relate and see and show how much emotion and movement can be added to stone, to material. And that's very close to the paint itself. When you look at this painting and stand in front of it, you have that emotional aspect in the actual material. So it's a very beautiful painting, and really enjoy. And if anyone wants to share their thoughts or say something about it, please go ahead. This is the beginning again. You can see these bunch of trees here. And they become bare and move to the side, and the storm becomes the bigness.
I do have an observation on that one.
Yeah.
And that is that he is messing with our sense of depth perception. The first daughter is substantially larger than the last daughter, and then on the large stone, the one side on the left is angled differently than the side on the right. So to me, it adds action, movement, instead of just a stationary. It shows something is happening, because the depth of field seems to be changing.
Yeah, I agree. It's a great observation. The first daughter is actually the angel, so the daughters are these two, but that doesn't matter. But what you said is very true. It's almost, it can be like a Cézanne still life almost, where you'd see with your head one side of the apple, but then it's not perspectival or like a photo. We move, we interact, we see things much more than just a regular perspective. So it's not literally just perspectival. You'd see another side, even if it's on the side, because he's moving, he as the painter, or us as the viewers. So I definitely, I agree. That's something I actually haven't thought of, and it's very true. Here, this painting here on the left is super meaningful for me personally, because it was one of the first things when I arrived to New York 22 years ago that I decided to copy, and I worked on it for a long time. And it just blew my mind how incredible the drawing of this figure is, and how weird it is, how weird this shape of the head, is, and how hard it is to actually copy, because we have so many preconceived ideas of how things look, but when we actually start looking and trying to go against those ideas, those preconceptions, we see very weird shapes happening, and this head is certainly that. And it's so well drawn. I can't think of a better figure drawing. And a funny anecdote about this is actually that I remember when I copied it, in the X-ray images of it, there was a big tree here, and much more in the landscape. And I recently read that when Corot exhibited in the salon, in the French salon, the main French critic wrote in the newspaper right after the opening that Corot exhibit a new figure painting, which has a beautiful landscape to it, but not very good figure drawing. And so Corot took it back and repainted the background, but didn't touch the figure. That's how the story goes, which I love. It's very Corot-like, if you hear the stories.
Is that original or is that your copy?
No, that's the original.
Okay.
Absolutely, yeah.
An amazing painting. Hey, Dov, why don't we switch back and maybe open it up for a second?
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone that wants to
Hi, everyone.
Say anything? Yeah.
Does anybody have any other thoughts on any of the paintings we've seen? I also want to say that all the information for these works are going to be available. We'll send them to you after the talk. And Dov, I know you have it available now. You want to explain?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, these are very late painting. This is called Woman Reading, and it's 1870. This is in 70 also landscape, and it's interesting seeing Corot's landscapes in a second. In the end of his life, we'll look at it in a second, and relating it to this narrative painting, because this storm and this godlike, which means so much in the narrative, also becomes his main motif, his main subject as he paints later in life. Here I'm relating two paintings that are in the Met as well. This is Van Gogh from 1889. And this is another one of Corot's great paintings there. It's called The Sibyl. It's from the 73, I think, actually. And I mean, there's such both such masterpieces that it's hard to, again, this is one of those paintings. The Van Gogh is so honest and so real, very much like Rembrandt self-portrait. It's one of those things that it's very hard to even say anything, because it's just there. It's right, so alive and so present, the presence of the figure, the energy, the shapes, the way they interlock, you can see it here. So much, I mean, it's yellow, it's a very simple, it's simple background, but it's so felt everywhere. It's painted with so much care here and in the sides, and it's just as good there as it is here. And he is so clear and precise. And on the other side of that, I think Corot allows himself to let things be in a moment of forming, not necessarily finished or formed, like a Van Gogh, who is also contains this ability to move in the figure, but it's very clear. In Corot, it's left open in such a way that's completely finished and done in a good way. And I think he absolutely decided that. It wasn't just left in the studio, or I think it's a complete decision. He had nothing else to add to this big painting. And the hand, you can see here another hand as it moved. It moved from here. It was here, and then he moved it here, and then you can see movements in this hand, completely always searching, moving the neck, and just the pose of and the elongation of the neck here. And it's so much the expression of her, you know, even more than what her features say. And it's a magical painting as well. They're both so tender and capture the human figure. It's very beautiful.
What's really amazing about these two, for me, I'm looking at, you know, two completely different ways of making painting, you know, and how easily it is to look back and forth from one to the other without even almost seeing that.
I know.
You know, it's just probably just the clarity you're talking about in them. It's like moving from one that's, you know, you couldn't almost have two more different kinds of painting on the way.
Yep.
That's
but
incredible.
They hold, you know, next to each other. Incredible.
I'd like to make a comment on the Van Gogh painting, which totally amazes me in that there's so much air. I mean, initially I would think it would feel suffocating, but it just feels so free and breezy. I love that yellow. When you had talked about the energy in it, if I try and do something like that, it gets super soggy and suffocating, but I don't get that at all with this.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
I agree too. I have the same problem, and you know, it's very hard to do that, to paint this here. You know, it's to keep the air, like you say,
Is
to
it
keep
a
it alive.
background issue? Is it an underpainting? I mean, does anybody really know how that?
I don't specifically know what was the course of this painting, for instance, but
Yeah.
like you say, the ability for that yellow to contain air is true magic, really.
Didn't he paint quickly? He painted, I mean, he didn't spend that, not quickly, but I don't think he spent days and days, right? I don't know, I'm not sure.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
I don't think we absolutely know, but I think you're right. I don't think he's one of those painters that necessarily had worked on paintings for years.
Mm.
But the amount of energy that he could put in one day would parallel no one.
Right.
Sorry, Chris. Go ahead.
I mean, I think as far as like how it's done, it's part of the magic of painting. I don't think there really is an answer. I think it has something to do with the force and clarity of his intention. And like the analogy would be whatever you feel about that strongly, the clarity will come, you know, and that's how I see it.
I've got a thought on the book. He's picked up the same yellow in the book as is in the wall. Is that an aesthetic choice, or is that just saying that she has picked up something out of that book that she's now placing in her imagination?
It's a nice way of interpreting it. I like that.
Yeah, that is cool.
Yeah. That's how narrative actually is part of every painting, even when it's from life of a person. What we call portrait is also contains narrative. Exactly how you just described that. I love that. It's also very, when it's yellow versus another yellow, it's very hard to see on the computer. So that would also have it. It's might have a different, you know. But I think you're probably right. I mean, there's something picked up from her internal world into this book, or you know. Another Corot painting here on the left. It's called The Letter, also from the 70s. and next to George Ruel. It's called The Old King. Much later, in the 30s, late 30s of the 20th century. And I connected them just from like, the expression and the emotion. I feel there's a connection there. That moment of contemplation. And Ruel is he's very spiritual, almost a religion icon painter, a modern religion icon painter, if you may, and very related to what we're going to see in a bit as well. And I just love that little Corot painting of the figure because it shows a different side of him. It shows how great he is as a figurative painter, just as well as much as a landscape painter, and the way the light travels. It's almost like a yin and yang feeling, and I feel it tells the story also of what's here, what's in this letter. You travel with your hand, with your eyes, from here through her, expression and into this hand and here. And also just going back here all the way down to this back wall here, and what's here, this little thing of, this little painting hanging. Oh, it's a beauty, real beauty. Again, anyone that has thoughts, please share them. And here you can see the world, where he's coming from. To me, he's coming from stained glass. He's coming from all these great iconic churches. And this is a different type of painting. It's painting. It's in the visual language of painting. It's not with paint, but it's putting together shapes. It's putting together colors. It's creating a narrative. It's doing everything the painting does with a different medium than paint. And real beauty. It's in the cloisters as well here in New York.
It's cool. Looks like stained glass.
It is stained. It's
it is stained glass.
Yeah.
Huh, see,
exactly,
it really looks like stained glass.
Yeah, exactly. And another figurative Corot here next to it. And here we're reaching a very late Corot right here on the left. This is pretty much the latest they have in the Met in his last year of life, and he ended up being just such a romantic landscape painter, putting all of the emotion that he can into this, like any great painter in his late works. Everything he wanted to say is accumulated into this painting, into this light, and this silvery light. The way he paints with grays is unbelievable. It's just a beautiful painting. There's not much to say. And next to it, on this side, I don't know if we can see it, if it's not taken by the Zoom panel, but this is Paul Resica painting in the 70s. And Paul Resica is still alive, thank God, like touch wood. He's 92. He lives in right now in the Cape Cod. And I worked for him for 7 years, and he is still very influential, I think, in terms of somebody who kind of carried the torch for a lot of painters, coming from the abstract expressionism in New York. Those Pollocks and Rothko and those great painters that painted what they painted. There were other painters at that same time, like Paul Resica, chief among them, who continued to paint from narrative or from nature. And Corot is definitely one of his biggest masters, and you can see that in this painting. In the 70s, he lived in south of France, and he painted that nature that was around him. There's a beauty in this painting. It's very simple, but the space he creates between these trees, their intervals, there's a space around that tree here, and it's a beauty. It's a little beauty, and you can see how light kind of comes through. How he's looking at some of the light moments that coming through from the trees here. How the branches of the trees are kind of the rhythm of the painting, and create these intervals through the painting, and the silvery aspect that he had a very big quest for in this time.
That's amazing, Resica.
Yeah.
How big is that painting, the Resica?
The Resica is pretty big, actually. I don't know the exact measurement, but it's a good size. You know, it's not a small painting. He painted big during those years. Yeah, always painted big. But this is definitely. And also this Corot, it's a little deceiving here. You don't see it, you don't get the scale, but it's not this small. It's a nice size. Here, very good friend of Paul, and our teacher as well, Rosemary Beck. Right on the left here, this is an embroidery. She died in 2003. I was personally very close to her, and she was and big inspiration for me and as a narrative painter, and I absolutely admire her and her work. I'm putting it next to this mosaic from Ravenna, this incredible mosaic from Ravenna. These were done in like the year 500, between 500 and 700. I was lucky enough to travel there a few years ago and see these, and they're unbelievable. I mean, just the amount of texture that the mosaic and color that they create, it's like paint, the most rich paint you can see. It's like a Titian, you know, it's like so much depth and air and weight, you know. And here, Rosemary, you can see, because it's an embroidery, it was almost like a meditative experience for her. She did these before she went to bed. She didn't even consider them great pieces of hers. You know, she just did them as meditation, you know. And they're so remarkable. I mean, really, they're some of the best narrative paintings that were done in this past century, I think. And again, she carried the torch for a lot of painters like all of us, because she did these at a time that was not that successful, or that it was not that appreciated. And both her and Paul, who actually called themselves brother and sister because they were very close for many years, they did two aspects of almost like taking that mantle and pushing it forward. And there's others, of course, in their group, and a lot of important artists that I'm not showing here, but they have a specificity to them in what they did that also really relates to Corot somehow for me. They're like somebody I once met. I went to a studio of his, and I remember he had a reproduction of that Corot of the woman reading, and he also had a reproduction of Paul. And I was like, wow, yeah, I love this Corot. And he said, yeah, and he said all of Corot's roads lead to Paul Resic. So that I always remember that, him saying that, and also Rosemary, she had this incredible affinity to Corot, and again, it's coming from trying to paint narratively and paint nature, combining the two, finding this incredible emotion, and looking at narrative as if you would look at still life, or as if you'd look at nature, you know, trying to go back to the story as something that stands outside of yourself, helps you reach yourself, but is almost doesn't let your ego take over, doesn't let your own personal, you know, it's something you can still look into and use in a good way. And this embroidery, the slowness of doing it relates to the mosaic. It's a very slow process, and that slowness is captured in a beautiful way, and captures energy. Anybody that has comments, please go ahead.
I have a question. When you were working together, did you share this kind of dialogue? Was there a lot of talking, or was it just nose to the grindstone working? What was your experience like?
That's a great question. Because it's funny, because I did not see one painting Rosemary painted ever while studying with her. I did not know how she paints. I only saw it 3 years after I studied with her for the first time, not even in a catalog or anything. So I had no idea. She was super shy about her work. There wasn't internet at the time, so you couldn't just look it up. I didn't, and she painted, just worked and painted and gave all of us a ton of knowledge. She was also incredibly funny and wise and mean, all of together.
She was all those things.
Yeah. But we just enjoyed, her and her wisdom and wit, and it was, sometimes we were laughing on the floor in the middle of the drawing class. No kidding. And today it would not work because she was not politically correct. So they would fire her today. It would not work.
Yeah, really, like inappropriate humor. It was awesome.
Exactly. And Paul is somewhat similar. The things I enjoyed the most working for him, he always called me the worst assistant he ever had. Because I couldn't do anything he asked me to do in a good way. But he kept me, because we enjoyed to eat lunch together and he told me stories and that's the person he is, and it's more important to him to share. And so it's magical and it's a different generation for sure. And there's no one from both those artists, the new painting more. My God, there's no one I can think of that knows more about painters than Paul. He knew painters from Hungary in some remote town. He knows everything. I've never seen knowledge like that. So he studied really, really hard. You would always meet him in the Met. If you'd go on Friday nights, he was always there. He would talk to everybody. He would, share his knowledge. And so that's very special.
Sounds like a super rich experience for sure.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Here's another Rosemary embroidery.
Those embroideries of hers are my favorite work by her. They're incredible.
They're incredible. And she didn't even consider them great. She didn't even consider them her art. She just did them in meditation at night. It's nuts. And next to a tapestry here, that's a big weave carpet in the cloister. It's amazing. It's huge. But you can see that quality of that flatness, but also depth that happens at once. And that comes from Paul's teacher, that Hans Hofmann, who was the biggest teacher in New York in the early 20th century and kind of the driving force for all the New York painting school and everything that came out of that. And his biggest thing was this thing called push and pull, which is something that both stands in the back and comes forward at the same time, this thing. And something we experience when we look at life and we look at each other. And it's not like a camera. It's not perspective. That's something that's far. Something that can be far can be very close. The power of it, the energy of it. And you can feel it here. You feel it in these shapes and in the background, how these things sit and come back. And also here, it's a marvelous thing. It's incredible. These dogs on top of the horse, they sit back, but they all stacked up. I'll just run through this for a second. Another stained glass, and another mosaic. So you see all these ways of painting, in embroidery, stained glass, mosaic. Here's a Paul Resica from the 80s, next to Matisse. Yeah, next to Matisse, obviously from the Fauve series, that's like 1900s. Matisse liberated color, didn't want the color to be contained in a shape, wanted it to sit, taking that from Cézanne, seeing it in Cézanne, but almost giving it another push, it's not so much a progression, it's just kind of an aspect to his work, where color just expands. And Paul obviously seeing that, and he's not that way a colorist like Matisse in any way, but that's how he is affected by Matisse in his way. He interprets that and brings it to his world. And that's how he studied, how he progressed as a painter. And jumping, because this is a Paul Resica here on the left from 2019, very late, next to the Chirico.
Looks like he's influenced by you.
By who?
By you.
I don't know. I'm much more influenced by him, if anything. We're so different, and there's, yeah. No, he's that's his world. He
in this particular painting.
I don't know about that. Thank you. It's he's you know, he's 90 years old here, you know, after 80 years of painting. So you know, this is accumulation of his work, because the beauty of it, and especially in real life, is that it's not just color. You feel how much stuff was in there. He had so many different things. I've seen it in his studio, not this specific painting, but like paintings of streets, of nature become nothing, or become mountains, or color, or so many things. They move, they change, and all of that history of the painting is then still in there, lives in that, and you feel it. You feel it in this. You cannot just generate that by painting red. It's generated by a long time of moving things, of trying to find the searching, of erasing, of adding, of erasing by adding, and for Paul, one of the biggest things is trying to, again, get at an essence and not leave anything that's not essential, which I don't necessarily think is in Corot, for instance. I don't think that idea of like taking things out was as important. You know, it's moving things for sure, and creating, but you didn't need to say less with more, say more with less. You know, that's a more of what I think Paul is after in some way. And there's this great metaphysical drama, and I think that's in this De Chirico, a painter that I really love as well. Because here you see perspective. It's all the things that supposedly that I just said I don't like, but here it's totally working, because I don't feel it has a meaning of space that perspective is saying. It's more of a narrative. He's a narrative painter. He's telling us a story with drama. You know, he's himself. That's the most important thing. It's being yourself, I guess, in some way.
Dov, can I break in here for a second?
Yeah, sure. Please.
We got about 5 minutes left, everybody, and I just want to remind everyone that you know, if you haven't jumped in already, it said something. If you want to, you're invited to. That's part of the point of this.
Yep.
I don't want anyone to think that this is like as a lecture. It's more like we're, you know, happen to all be sitting around the same table kind of thing. You're obviously, you don't want to say anything. You're no obligation to, but you're invited to jump in anytime if you have any observations, any questions at all. So yeah, and thanks again for being here. Dov, you.
Yep. I see there's a few questions in the chat here. Maybe you should see them. Somebody wants to. I will look at them. Yep.
It looked like someone was asking a question about the story about our painting connecting with books we read before.
Oh
Do you want to explain that? Are you here? No, I guess maybe they left.
Yeah, maybe they left. Okay, I'll just.
Also, again, I want to reiterate that we'll be sending along the information. And Dov, can you explain how the information is available, like right now, about the paintings? You said you'd.
We will. I uploaded it to the chat if you want to take it from there, or we can share it afterwards in a separate email.
Please share it. Because I think the question or the comment was from me about the books. I think that's how we paint. I think we are inspired by what we read, what we see, what we heard, or any conversation at all. I think I was responding to the previous question about what is this narrative has to do with marketing our art. And to me, if we understand, if we create a painting and we understand how, we learn how to tell a story about what we paint, then perhaps that's a way to market it or have someone interested in our story. Because story is not always by verbal or written, but we artists tell a story through colors and shape and, you know, whether it's flat or sculpture. So
I think that's a great point.
To that.
I understand. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's a good point too. I think it's very true. I mean, stories are so powerful. Knowing how to tell a story and about your own work is super powerful tool. You know, and if you can learn it from painting or any other way, that's how you go about it. You know,
I'm finding it really not only enjoyable but valuable when you reflect on the things that you're drawing that are personally meaningful to you, because it seems like, you know, it's a connection and we're all like these little pictures so separated, and I find it's really helping me to feel very connected. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think that's the beauty of us talking, you know, and I think the more this happens, maybe I talk less and everybody else can talk more or share their own personal experiences with painting, you know.
I do have a thought on the work on the left. I don't know who it's by.
It's by Rosemary.
Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
I'm not sure if I'm looking at a still life or I'm looking at her look at a still life.
Mm-hmm.
Great. I agree. I think that's exactly the beauty of what she was doing there. I think she was able to paint a still life and still make it a narrative painting, a story, you know, personal story. It's a self-portrait more than anything. She you know, she was a violinist and as a young adult. So you see the violin, and then there's the painting that she loves, and then there's the flowers and the colors that she loves, and the construction. You know, it's so powerful. You can see how much she studied and learned from the embroideries and these, you know, these negative spaces, how they push and pull and doing that, and it's almost like a Cezanne, how strong it is structurally. Yeah.
I wonder if that's an image of her in the background. I don't know what she looks like.
I think that's a painting. That's like from a Dutch painting, but
okay.
But yeah, I think we're always a little bit paint ourselves. You know, I think that's always true. So when we paint.
So, Dov, why did you put these two things together? Because the way I see it, one is Rosemary is extremely not complicated, but a lot. You know, it's but on the other side is very minimalist. So why did you put this thing together?
You know, opposites. I think they're both very strong paintings, and I think in that way they connect, and I think they were really close. And yes, they were opposites, because what I said about Paula being, you know, trying to get to the essence and say more with less is not true with Rosemary. She was the opposite of that. But in this painting, and when she was very successful, she was able to contain all of that stuff, you know, and that's a remarkable achievement and admirable today, I feel, because it's so rare, you know. But if you look at the Paul, it's not much. There's a lot of things going on. I mean, you have all these figures. It's 6, you know, 5 figures, boats. You feel the depth of the sea, the plane of the floor. You know, you feel the sky. You feel the boats. You know, making a structure from the sides. These diagonals. There's so much going on, even though doesn't come across as a lot. There's a lot. It's very hard to do. So much work into this painting and make it successful.
I think that there's a quality of light that's the same in both of them. The way the light, the way the sun seems to be shining into the space.
I can see that. Yeah.
I think this one, the one on the right, has some Turner in it.
Yeah, I can see that swirling Turner lights.
No horizon.
Yeah.
Dramatic.
Yeah.
Who?
Someone
That
asked.
was
Someone asked that this painting on the left would be
It
part of
was
the
me.
slide.
I love that painting. I love
Oh,
it.
good. Okay, good. So here it is. It's a tough connection next to Paul. I mean, I'm sorry for this painter because I think it's not fair to put it next to Paul, at least for me, because I think the Paul is a lot stronger. However, I wasn't, I was very happy when I saw that this show came up in New York of this painter, because here's a young painter who's painting narratively and getting a show in the Whitney Museum. It's awesome. I went to see it. And that's why I feel comfortable talking a little bit about it, because I actually went to see it in real life. And I think that's a huge difference. I mean, than just seeing it in reproduction. And there's a lot of qualities that I enjoyed, and the narrative, his talent. There's other things that felt not as strong, and maybe he will get there. Hopefully. It didn't feel very abstract in a way. Like it felt almost like a description of a story of a moment, but not so much.
Tell me what you mean by abstract in that way, because it's not an abstract painting.
To me, abstract and real are the same thing. So they're not separated. If something is paint, if the figure is painted, but is not also a shape or part of shapes that interlocked, or it's part of a certain structure, then it just becomes a singular thing. It becomes a description. It's not. So, for instance, when I look at some of the back wall here, and the shapes that it creates next to this figure and next to this, some of it became holes as I was looking at it in real life. It's harder to see here because graphically it's so strong. It's very beautifully done in a graphic way, which is not something that's not really good aspect of painting, or any less than anything else. But the abstraction, the way the wall was working as opposed to this, didn't feel as strong in real life. The way the light was, it felt a little more singular. And if I look at the Paul here, if you just look at the shape, this shape here, how much pressure this shape is putting on this tree. It's coming forward. It's like really, really strong. It's putting so much pressure right on top, right here. But it's also air. That ability, that shape, that power of mass doesn't really exist here. I mean, it's like the person is standing on the floor, but the floor is not holding him. There's no mass, There's no mass. The figure is not filled with energy inside. It doesn't have weight, and you look at the Paul here, so much weight to the air, so much.
Interesting.
That's the way I see that.
Well, when you saw this painting,
yeah,
the movement of the hands really brought me closer to the dance that I see. Were you not getting that? Is that really, if I were physically in front of it, it wouldn't affect me? That's what we were talking about with the graphic nature of it.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. There's a lot of good things. That movement. I see that. I see how he's trying to get this hand to go back, but I'm not sure. Is it really going back or is it going forward? I feel he's not really deciding spatially where it's going, and that confusion isn't something that is helping me see the painting when I'm sitting in front of it. He's making me have to work to try and understand what's going on. But again, he's capable and he's creating beautiful things with, he's able to create energy, some sort of energy in narrative and image making. There's just spatial clarities that in real life were falling apart for me.
I get that.
What's the name of this artist? What's the name of
Salman Tour, and he's got a show right now at the Whitney.
Wow.
Again, it's just, it's, to me, if I feel like that this figure is not sitting in the really, it starts floating, but it's not a decision to float. It's not an angel, it's not, that complicates my experience.
Well, and Marianne,
yeah.
I doubt you'd be like that you would not enjoy it as much. I think that, a person's instinct to love a painting is one of the most important things you could pay attention to. I mean, it's definitely interesting hearing someone who gets to see the painting in real life.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I was kind of excited to share it, because I thought he might likely be able to physically see it, where I'm not going to be able to do that. So
yeah, I was excited when I saw it, because I definitely, and by the way, I think I can change my mind too in a few years about it, and he can paint a new painting that can show me something that he's doing here that I couldn't see. I mean, who knows? It's a living thing. It's not even set. Even this painting is not set in some way, and it's also just my interpretation and feeling in that moment, which can be affected by so many things. And
that's cool. I'm glad to talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I read a review of the show, because it was written by the daughter of a friend. And I kind of, without seeing it live, I felt like you do. But I feel like what he was very, very, very successful at abstracting is the color. Everything else, I totally agree with you without even seeing it. And I feel exactly the same way that you do. But I do think he was able to achieve that figurative abstraction, whatever you want to call it, narrative, with the color, but not with anything else. Anything else remains in the illustrative, and kind of like you say, if the figure was meant to feel like it was floating, it's one thing, but it's not. So it's very off.
Yeah, to be true. That is something to think about, and I would love to go see it again.
Can I just say, I love that lamp so much, though.
That's awesome.
I really do.
Yep. Something in that lamp and what Yael just said resonates, because I do feel like there is a quality of green, or some sort of quality of green that stays, that had a feeling to it, and
it's almost like a photograph, and then you put you use that like old-fashioned filter to it, and then it turned like very green. You know how you can take photograph and then you can filter whether it's sepia or whatever. That looks like that to me.
My eyes keep going to his pants.
This is a moment that I really wish we could stand in front of a real painting, because I think it's so, we can get a lot, and we use this medium of the computer, and it's important in the way we interact this way, and it has a lot of great values to it. But there's so much deep stuff in the work that we can then see in life, and in front of the actual paint. That's so important that I can't even say anything about the color. To me, it's like so personal, and in front of how can we say what for me?
Hey, Dov.
Yeah.
This is obviously, I mean, I could sit here for hours personally, but it's we're going on an hour now, and maybe just for organizational sake, we could
absolutely.
But yeah, so maybe we'll call it good, and we'll take it up again next week. And Marianne, thanks a lot for sending in that painting. Anybody else, please feel free to do so as well. And even if it doesn't make it into that particular talk, it will eventually, because obviously, sometimes Dov actually organizes a specific theme for the evening.
But this actually worked.
I know it did. It's awesome. Yeah. Yep. So again, thank you again for sending that, Marianne, and everyone else is welcome to do the same. And thanks for joining in. Thanks for being here. Dov, thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
Bye.
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 Thank you.